Hi, in this video we're going to talk about the life of uh, Miguel de Cervantes. So we're just going to use this PowerPoint here. Okay, so the life of Miguel de Cervantes, a Spanish author, something a lot of people know about him, but also a soldier, interestingly enough, and he did quite a few things in his life. So we'll just go over it briefly. He was born in September 1547. That's the sort of date that we assume. And then he died in April of 1616. Um, Historians aren't exactly sure about all the details of his life. He did write Don Quixote, which is thought of often as the first modern novel. Most of his life was lived in poverty and obscurity, so he wasn't as famous in the past as he is now. And most of his work was produced or published really at the end of his life, so in the last few years before his death. And so there's a lot of uncertainty about everything he did, but here's we have a pretty good idea about some things. So this is the uh, this is a portrait ostensibly of him. Um, there's no known portrait without any sort of dispute as to whether or not um, it should be attributed to sort of him, what he actually looked like in his early life. So he's Spanish. He was baptized here, obviously, in the quite a while ago. So there wouldn't be cars when he was baptized there, but he was baptized here at this church. It's not known. It's thought that he might have been a Morisco, which is a descendant of an Arab in Spain, essentially, or converso, which is a descendant of a Spanish Jew who converted to Christianity in order to stay in the country. At the time, 20% about of Spain's population in the south was in one of those categories, so it wouldn't be outlandish. And there's some people who think that he might have been either a Morisco or a converso. He was the second son of a barber, Rodrigo de Cervantes, and Leonor de Cortinas. Um, Rodrigo was from Córdoba in Andalusia, where his father, Juan, was a lawyer. His father was imprisoned for debt for several months, and his mother supported the family. So his father was not a very stable figure, probably, in Cervantes' life. We don't know, obviously, a lot, but records indicate that he probably was not if he was imprisoned for debt. And they moved around a lot. We do know that from records. And it was a large family as well. So 7 siblings. We had a big family, constantly moving around, and not a super stable way to grow up. So here we've got a statue honoring him that was obviously um, dedicated after his life. So one thing we do know about his later life is that there was an arrest warrant for a Miguel de Cervantes, probably him, dated 15th of September 1569. And he was charged with wounding another man, Antonio de Segura, in a duel. Um, so apparently he had some experience before he went off to war. He got a commission, and it's thought maybe he got this commission so somebody would take care of his warrant, but he fought in the Ottoman-Venetian War. So he fought against the Ottoman Empire, which in Europe that was quite a big thing because the Ottoman Empire was at that time very powerful, and a lot of people were afraid it would take over pretty much all of Europe eventually. He fought in naval battles, and he was wounded in those naval battles. And was actually quite proud of his wounds. He appears to have been quite proud of sort of his fighting in his wounds. But he was eventually captured by the Ottomans and was held for 5 years, during which he tried to escape 4 times. So he was held essentially as a slave. During his life, during his captivity, potential patrons, a lot of them passed away, which made it a little bit harder to finance a writer's lifestyle after he was released from captivity. He did marry later in life, and he had an illegitimate daughter with an innkeeper's wife, Ana Franca. as well. And he did acknowledge his paternity later on in life as well. So it's not just so much hearsay. He actually believed that this woman's daughter was his child. At one point in his later life, he applied for positions in Spanish America, but was rejected from these positions. Ostensibly, he applied for them sort of with his trying to get it with his military background. And he's thought to have died by diabetes. The these sorts of symptoms that were described that we have in the historical records are consistent with diabetes. And then his remains were actually put in the convent of the Barefoot Trinitarians in Madrid. And I believe that this picture is represents that convent. Interestingly enough, his remains were lost and then refound and buried in public cemetery. So they're not here anymore, but they were at one point put here. And so at least in his death, he was fairly honored, for quite a while, despite having lived most of his life in obscurity. And his most famous work here is Don Quixote, obviously. And so when I first saw this, it looked sort of like some sort of a demented dragon or something. But this is this is a windmill here. Oh, sorry, I'm not drawing very well over it. We've also got a horse, and then, yeah, so I think you can make out the rest. There are lots of windmills in the background. So this is just the sail of a windmill, or one of the sails of a windmill. And Don Quixote is a book about first of all, he left behind a lot of other works, but Don Quixote is about an idealist who goes out and tries to slay dragons that don't really exist. So an idealist in the real world. So it's interpreted variously, sometimes as sort of a pessimistic and sometimes as less of a pessimistic book. But it is, as we said earlier, the first really modern novel. And some quotes, some of them I believe from Don Quixote, and yes, some of them from Don Quixote, and then this will give you sort of an idea of sort of the outlook and the view people have kind of his work. So this first one is definitely from Don Quixote. It's finally, from so little sleeping and so much reading, his brain dried up and he went completely out of his mind. So it's about a main character who does so much reading about sort of knights and whatnot, and so little sleeping. He's so focused on these sort of idealized portrayals of what a person should be that he goes completely crazy. But he doesn't go completely crazy and go kill a bunch of people. He goes completely crazy and believes he's a knight. The next one, the truth may be stretched thin, but it never breaks, and it always surfaces above lies, as oil floats on water. So you can see this is much more of a sort of philosophical quote than the other one, which is sort of a tongue-in-cheek way to look at idealism. But the truth may be stretched thin, but it never breaks. It's kind of a very interesting and I think profound way to look at things. And the last one, when life itself seems lunatic, who knows where madness lies? Perhaps to be too practical is madness, to surrender dreams. This may be madness. Too much sanity may be madness, and maddest of all, to see life as it is and not as it should be. So you can see in this one, there's sort of a union of the philosophical nature of this second quote, and then also this sort of commentary on the idealism of the first quote. So he's not entirely mocking this idealism. He certainly is partially mocking it. He's saying, hey, look, you can be so full of idealism that you go a little crazy. He's not entirely mocking it. he sees that ideals have to them some merit and value, especially in a life that seems lunatic and mad. So I think sometimes we'd like to see his work Don Quixote as being primarily about essentially the lunacy of idealism, but that's not, I don't think, really fair, to be completely honest. So that is the the PowerPoint, and I hope you liked it.